Well, as I said, here I am to answer your questions like I said I was going to. Are you, obviously, I can't do them all because there was like 800 and something comments, so I just took like the best ones. Are you a Maoist third worldist? I thought that was obvious. I am. What are your thoughts on it? What do you think of the third world nationalism? Do you support it, or do you see it as being the same as any form of nationalism and therefore being wrong? Thanks. No. Nationalism in the first world, or the occupier nation, manifests itself as imperialism. I know that is not what Marxists intend when they do that. But when you bring that to the masses, that's what it's going to come out as. It's going to come out as patriotic, pro-military, and all that garbage. That's what it does in the first world. When it does that in the third world, it is liberation struggle from the occupier. That is to say, the material conditions of the first world and the third world differ. And as a result, nationalism manifests itself different in those two ways. That would be the answer to that. Do you think 9/11 was faked? I'm going to interpret that as, do I think 9/11 was an inside job? I don't know. I've seen a lot of stuff that doesn't add up, some, quote-unquote scientific explanations that that don't make sense to me. Suffice to say that I don't know if it was an inside job or not, but I lean heavily towards that it wasn't. Are you a vegetarian? No, I am not a vegetarian, because I do not believe that animals have the same rights as human beings. I am opposed to factory farming. I am against torturing animals. I do, however, reserve the right of indigenous peoples to continue their indigenous practice. I'm not opposed to the eating of meat. I am only opposed to factory farming and the unnecessary suffering of animals. If somebody successfully created synthetic meat and it was fine, all that, I would wholeheartedly support switching to that. But suffice to say, no, I am not a vegetarian. What is the relevancy of Maoism in the current world where there's practically no peasantry? Also, are Maoists necessarily third worldists? No. Just because you're a Maoist doesn't make you a third worldist. This is a common misunderstanding. Maoism isn't about the peasantry. Maoism is about understanding the particular material conditions and applying the Marxist-Leninist line to those different conditions. For example, the original Black Panthers were Maoists. They applied Marxist-Leninist ideas to their particular condition. Obviously, being African Americans in the United States is different than being an industrial worker in Russia, and is different from being a peasant in China. Mao's great breakthrough was learning how to apply Marxism-Leninism to its particular conditions. So Maoism is not about the peasants. In China, it was about the peasants because that's the material conditions that they faced. What do you think of Albanian communist Enver Hoxha? Enver Hoxha was good for Albania. There's absolutely no question. However, I firmly believe that he was, to some degree, a racist. And I find almost all Hoxhas to be closet racists themselves. There's some things that just don't add up about things he said. Like, his work on Mao was just absolutely terrible. The only thing he got right was attacking the three worlds theory, which was wrong. But then he went on to make these ridiculous things and accusations and then completely butcher his quotes to make them say something he didn't. Like, oh, Mao let the peasants run the revolution. No, Mao said the peasants were a wave of force for change, and it was their job to get to the head of that wave and guide it. It's things like that that made absolutely no sense. It's insane, some of the things he said. Some of them were downright stupid. And Hoxha was not stupid, which means his choice of actions, why he did that, would have to have been ideologically motivated. There's some of the that he said that didn't make any sense. He called the Che Guevara an anarchist, which makes no sense. Commander in the military, president of the National Bank, Ministry of Industrialization, the Ministry of Agriculture. That's not an anarchist. That's pretty bureaucrat, actually. I mean, there are rightful criticisms that you could make of Che, like he tried to take the Cuban model and export it to other countries and it didn't work, because that guerrilla FOCO, that FOCOism, was what worked in Cuba. Well, that's not what's going to work somewhere else. He couldn't stand to be a bureaucrat. He had to keep fighting. He had to keep being a guerrilla commander. You could accuse him of, to some degree, adventurism. But you couldn't call him an anarchist. That doesn't make any sense. If Che Guevara has a flaw in any of those things, is that he wants to get things done and can't stand to sit around not getting things done. He just wants revolution that badly. But no, Enver Hoxha, like, he just turned into a total dick to everybody. I find it very suspicious that if you talk to Hoxhists, or like even Hoxha, they just hate every Marxist who isn't white. The only one they give any respect to is Ho Chi Minh. And I think by about that point, people were starting to look at, you know, Enver Hoxha crooked, like, why are you hating all of the Marxists of color? And then turns around and, oh, well, I like Ho Chi Minh. I'm not saying Hoxha was necessarily racist, but he had a Euro-chauvinist mentality. And I think that Euro-chauvinist mentality comes out in Hoxhists themselves. There's a lot of Hoxhists that are outright racist. There's some organizations, Hoxhist organizations, that are outright racist. Do you think it is ever a moral obligation to invade another country? Yeah, of course. Regarding one of your videos with Assad, I noticed that you tend to think of nationalism as a kind of a good thing. Reading and studying some ideologies online, you see from my perspective that the nationalist right tends to be anti-globalist, anti-imperialist, anti-immigration, for tendencies to seem to want some protectionism, since the far left and far right tend to be against imperialism, globalism. I don't remember the far right being against... oh, yeah, you can say the far right are anti... It's hard to say with the far right. Yeah, they are anti-globalism, they are anti-imperialist, but they're ridiculously deluded on what causes it. Like, they say they're against it, but they would do the very thing that would cause it. Like, they just have no idea what they're talking about. And people who are right, not far right, are pro-imperialist. So, it comes down to, like, what I was saying before about the way nationalism manifests itself in certain material conditions. And from these, obviously, you have a difference between the United States and other countries, first world, third world, different conditions, etc. The point is that you supported Assad, but I think that his way of being secular and building a state to benefit his people is the way to go. Now, I don't support capitalism. I don't support the bourgeois democracy that Assad stands for. But I stand by their right to self-determination and their right to resist imperialism. That is the only reason I've ever backed the guy, because they have a right to resist U.S. imperialism. I'm not saying Assad is even really all that great. I'm just saying, from an anti-imperialist standpoint, I back Assad against the United States, NATO, and the rest of them. I also believe that BRICS is the future, you know, the BRIC countries. What do you think about nationalism because it can produce a state for the people and can actually pay off debts and provide full employment? I don't see why you would need nationalism to pay off a debt. You would just need the money. I don't get why that's really there. You would need a state to pay off a debt, of course. And again, I would actually make the argument, is the debt even legitimate? If it's a debt to the IMF, I would tell them to screw off, because odds are they were coerced into taking that anyway. And the debt was probably taken on against the will of the people anyway, so I would say that there's no obligation to pay that debt back anyway. But as BRICS being the future, that's kind of a vague statement, but I assume it means, is BRICS going to rise as a challenge to U.S. hegemonic power? Very possibly, but in the end, we're really just talking about one imperialist power replacing another one, or possibly a multi-imperialist power world, which that could happen. Again, we'll have to see. What are your thoughts on the books Animal Farm and 1984? They're books. They're a great symbol of, right-wing intellectualism. A work of fiction that's somehow supposed to be applicable to reality. It's not any different than Ayn Rand or anything else like that. It's a nice little fairy tale. And also rather ironic that George Orwell was a socialist. He was Trotscum, but he was a socialist. And right-wingers don't seem to realize that when they read his works. What became of your YouTube friends you made videos with in the beginning? Would you consider making videos with more people who have your political persuasion in the future? Rednick D went on to be involved in union politics, and then he became an ANCOM for some reason. Like, I don't get why that. Like, he was the guy who basically got me into Maoism, and now he's an ANCOM, so I have absolutely no idea why that happened. You'd have to ask him. Nightcrow Red, I don't know exactly what happened to him. He had other things that he had to do, and now he's like dealing with IRL stuff and whatnot. But it's not like we had a falling out or anything. It's just they moved on to do more important things than I'm doing. A while back you said in a video, I can't remember which one, you said the cops were giving you the nod. Do they still do that? By this I'm referring to the arrest that I had back in 2012, and needless to say, the matter is still before the courts, so I really can't comment on it right now. But when there comes a time that I can, then I'll say something. Why did the USSR under Stalin, support the creation of Israel? Well, that's because Stalin did feel, Stalin was kind of screwed on the national question. Like, his work was good, but then his application of it was really weird. But he believed in a state of Israel for the Jewish people to exercise their self-determination. If Stalin had seen what Israel became today, he would oppose it. But the point of Stalin supporting something like that was so they could exercise their right to determination, self-determination, which is what that was about. Why do you think there's been such a reaction against feminism in the last few years, even from people who consider themselves on the left? I really consider it just a manifestation of first worldism. It's really a case of we can't be criticized. Like, if you criticize first world Marxists and the tendencies that they have, tendencies that are racist, some of them that are just theoretically bankrupt, they get mad at you. How dare you challenge me? You hate Marxism. You're against the people. ... Of course, they don't really demonstrate how you're wrong, but they do that. And it's kind of the same thing. We're socialists, we're right, we're the front, we go. Yeah, but your thing about being sexist is wrong because you're being sexist right now. Oh, no, I'm not. It's kind of one of those things where it's okay to attack the other side, but when you're attacking your side, they just can't handle it. I wouldn't be surprised if this sudden explosion of anti-feminism is a reaction to the possibly incoming death of misogyny. One of the big things with social forces is that they're kind of like tornadoes, in that they are the worst before they blow themselves out. I think the same thing of this resurgence of Christian fundamentalism in the United States. Christian fundamentalism is dying, but there has been a massive resurgence of it since Barack Obama got reelected, but they're not racist. It's starting to blow itself out. It's starting to come to an end. And this massive upsurge is kind of like the person who becomes the most hardcore in their belief of religion when they're beginning to lose their faith. And I think that might be what it is. Like, they're going on lamenting the loss of masculinity, implying masculinity or femininity is even a good thing. But, the quote-unquote, the Neanderthal man, the tough guy, the macho 80s kind of thing, that's dying out. And they're lamenting that. And this is their reaction to that. They believe that the loss of their masculinity is therefore the loss of themselves. And I would think that that probably has a lot to do with it. But then again, different material conditions in different countries would manifest themselves differently. I am, of course, referring to the West when I just gave. What do you think of the Democratic People's Republic Korea's Juche ideology, and what do you think might happen if the Juche ideology was in our lives? No. Each country finds its own thing. Guerrilla Focoism worked in Cuba. Bolshevism worked in the Soviet Union. You know, the revolutionary struggle, new democracy, whatever have you, worked in China. Juche is what worked in Korea. I don't think it would work anywhere else. I think it's uniquely their idea that works for their conditions. And there are rightfully some criticisms that you can make of that. Like, for example, I would say Juche wasn't strongly enough grounded in Marxism-Leninism, which leads to some of the, you know, the reactionary things that we're seeing out of the DPRK today. But to answer the straight question, I think Juche is a quote-unquote a North Korean thing. Whatever our way would be different. We can't just take the template of some other country and then paste it onto ourselves. It's just not going to work. Every time that's been attempted, it's failed horribly. My question to you is the same I posed to right-wing libertarians, but reversed. Why do you oppose the authoritarian tyranny of capitalism and not the state? Secondly, why don't you trust the workers' capacity to liberate and govern themselves? Okay, this question is already flawed, implying that the Vanguard Party is not the workers liberating and governing themselves. That's just an outright belief that they have. So it's already been misrepresented. Capitalism is the tyranny. That's why it has to go. Again, I always refer to this ANCOM position of being against the state as blaming the gun. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. And that's an absolute truth. The state is no different. And a gun is a pretty good symbol for the state. So why can't we pick up that same tool and use it ourselves? I mean, you can make the claim that states do this, states do that, but states aren't conscious entities in and of themselves. That's what ANCAPs believe. They literally believe that it's an entity unto itself that has its own goals and its own ambitions, and that it's not the tool of a particular class. We have to use that same tool back against them. You're not going to be able to defeat the capitalist class unless you repress the shit out of them. Use their weapon against them. Use the state. This has been proven to be the only thing that actually works. You have to turn that force of violence against the capitalist class if you're going to achieve a revolution and keep it. Literally, doing it any other way just doesn't work. It literally doesn't. The CPUSA doesn't run their own candidates, only support the Democrats. Yeah. Do you approve of this? No. And if not, what alternative communist organization to the USA do you consider a better choice? I would say in general, like, if you were going to just outright reject the third worldist position, because I would say none of them are, because they're first worldist groups, they support a first worldist line. Not necessarily a first world group being bad, but the first worldist line is bad. But if you were going to reject the third worldist line, I would suggest, if you felt like you wanted to do it, you could join up with those that are trying to reform the CPUSA or the Workers' World Party. Outside of that, the parties in the first world are genuinely completely awful. I don't support the first worldist line, but if I believed anybody really cares, I would say the Workers' World Party. Because while I would disagree with them on some things, I believe they genuinely really want to achieve something. What do you... Where am I? On a scale from 0 to 10, how annoying is the human nature argument? 10. What are your thoughts on Quebec separation? I did a video on this previously, so I won't really say that much. I do oppose it. I oppose Quebec separation because of the way it manifests itself. A white nationalist movement. And it is. It manifests itself in a tremendous amount of racism. It is essentially, long story short, I have a video on it. You could just check that rather than listen to this about it. It's a white nationalist movement. Why do you support Anita Sarkeesian? when she has been debunked by people like Thunderfoot. She was not debunked by Thunderfoot. Thunderfoot strawman the hell out of her. I actually did make my own video on this, and then I ended up not uploading it, but I still do have it. I support Anita Sarkeesian because it is criticizing culture that is sexist. Now, the reason I say this is because there is a phenomenon called first worldist feminism. And what it does is it completely ignores all sexism in the first world to just point at the third world and go, oh, look, circumcisions, oh, look, hijabs, burqas, femicide, and all this other stuff. All of which is bad. But it uses that to cover up the sexism that is in our society. And the reason that's important is because, one, first world women are women too, and two, the sexism of the first world is projected onto the third world as well. Look at the mass rapes that occur when the United States military goes anywhere. Look at the rapes of women that occur in the countries they're occupying right now. You know, that comes from a first world mentality. What I'm saying is, don't ignore what it is that first world society does in order to point fingers at the third. It's one of those first worldist lines that think, well, I don't really care about somebody who, I don't really care about video games or whether or not they're sexist because there's such and such going on in the third world. Well, it is kind of important, because if you won't cure your own sexism, how can you even claim that you're going to, or racistly claim that you're going to cure somebody else's sexism in the third world? It's just one of those things of passing the buck off to somebody else and ignoring what you're doing wrong yourself. Also, do you think each race should have their own homeland, where they can practice their own culture, religion, etc.? I believe in giving autonomy to oppressed groups. Not every race has their own country. I believe in self-determination for oppressed peoples. And by the way, you should interpret that as an anti-white position. What do you think about the ways in society fucks over men? Men are much more likely to get harsher sentences for the same crime, more likely to be homeless, more likely to commit suicide, more likely to be victims of gun violence, more likely to drop out of school, more likely not to go to college. I'd like to see some stats for that. And more likely to work shitty jobs, and more likely to die on said shitty jobs. Yes, all of this presented here, except the part about college, which I don't think is true, is true. The problem here is that women don't do it to men. Men do it to men. And that seems to be one thing MRAs or misogynists just can't get through their heads. When men do something to other men, it is not women's fault. Do men are more likely to commit suicide? Yes, but women also attempt suicide much more. Men are more successful at it because we're better trained for violence. More likely to be homeless? Yes, again, there's an idea that a man should be able to survive homelessness, and an idea that women shouldn't be able to survive homelessness. Again, this is not something women force on men, it's something men force on other men. When you tell another man to man up or suck up whatever problem they're having, it isn't a woman forcing you to do that, it's a man doing it to another man. So while these things are true, men are more likely to die on the jobs because, well, more than likely women are kept out of these jobs. It is men doing it to other men. And while these things are true, it's not women's fault that they happen. What is your opinion of the men's right movement in a nutshell? Gulag. Hey, I'm curious about your opinion on Nestor Makhno. I actually meant to ask this last time you did an AMA, but I failed. Nestor Makhno. Nestor Makhno explains how he created communism. He chain-ganged peasants, was an anti-Semite, and did a whole lot of other nasty shit. Oh, and refused to industrialize. The opposite of what the Soviet Union did. The guy was a nut job. And he was ridiculous. Like, why would you refuse to industrialize? Lack of industrialization is massive poverty. Refusing to do that is just simply ridiculous. And to chain gang peasants, come on, seriously? Why should we listen to a Marxist third worldist living in the first world and speaking mainly to first world people? Well, if you don't like to, then don't do it. But I am giving an idea I am spreading the third worldist line. Obviously, I can't speak to third world people. I have to speak to first world people. I'm trying to reach what people can get it, can deliver it, and can go with it. So to just go third worldist, as I see the quotation marks you gave, you're just being an asshole. Why should I listen to some complete nobody on the internet who I've never met and will never even remember having read this about? It's like, it's a complete non sequitur. It's either the third worldist line is correct or it's not. You're just attacking the man. It's dumb. Jason, since you're a bisexual man and a radical thinker, I'm curious about your thoughts on male sexual orientation. Given the sexual fluidity of men in ancient Greece and present-day tendency for people to stick with a particular label, gay, straight, bi, etc., do you think that sexual orientation is largely socially constructed? Actually, I'm going to have to go with a combination of genetics and social construction. The fact is, we don't really have a lot of information on that at the moment. It is partly a choice and partly not a choice. But if it's not a choice, I mean, if it is a choice, who cares? There's nothing actually wrong with it anyway, so who cares if it's a choice or not? Do you think Stefan Molyneux is a cult leader? Probably. Also, would you have a regressive, reactionary, petty, backwards, petty bourgeois person as a partner if they were hot enough? I've never actually come up against this problem, but I guess so. I probably would. I mean, again, hot doesn't explain it. It would be how well you get along. I mean, you could have a partner who was really hot, but if they were annoying as hell, how long would that last? You know what I mean? It's like reducing it to merely looks is just not enough. What are your views on the Young Turks? Annoyingly liberal, and again, let me just say this about Cenk. If he wants to talk political maneuvering in the U.S., he's absolute ace at it. He's absolutely on the ball, gets it right all the time, and points out everything. As soon as he talks about something outside of the United States, he has no idea what he's talking about. He just goes complete idiot. He has no idea what he's talking about. And one other thing he did that pissed me off, he was referring to the Marxist conception of the withering away of the state to the same thing as ANCAPs, getting rid of the state. That's two completely different concepts, and he doesn't see a difference. Perhaps you've already addressed this question, but if not, what can anti-capitalist radicals and revolutionaries in the First World do to help Third World revolutionaries that isn't treason, that would actually do good for international proletarian movement? Nothing. You do have to commit treason. That is the whole point. It is resistance in the First World, revolution in the Third World. Essentially, what you have to do is carry out a policy called national suicide. You do have to screw over your own national interests in order to support the groups which are actually revolutionary. You have to, if you can, in some way cause a sabotage or a destabilization of the imperialist core, like start up movements that just destabilize the political situation or what have you. Us in the First World can't be revolutionary, but we can do resistance. We can mess things up when we can make life difficult for the bourgeois. For example, the minimum wage. Raise the minimum wage all the way, make it $15,000 an hour. Screw over the entire economic system and collapse it. And that'll end their imperialist conquest because they won't be able to afford it and the system will be destroyed. To be honest, unless you don't consider that treason, it's hard to say, like, I would be going by the legal definition of treason. It's just resistance. I'm not sure where the line is on the law on that. What do you think happened to Miss Hannah Minks? I have no idea. I've heard a lot of contradicting information, but nothing actually solid. I have no idea, and I don't think it really matters. Why is it, Jason, that you act like you're a champion of peace? No, I don't. I don't support peace. Pointing out the evils of imperialism and capitalism, yet you know the evils of everything else. Most of the evil that's in the world today is capitalist imperialism. What I mean is that you're quick to point out bad stuff, particularly about white America, but you very rarely point out the wrongs of China today. That's because China is not the primary imperialist core, the primary imperialist power. I've made criticisms of China before, like the fact that the entire goddamn country is reactionary. I mean, I've made that. Whenever you talk about China, you polish a turd and talk about Mao, which has nothing to do with the country it's like now. No, actually, I criticize China and say things were right under Mao and they're wrong now. So this question, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. First, I have a few questions. First, in your video in the NCR, you said something along the lines that terrorists are not a threat. Could you explain why you think this? Well, because terrorism, what we're given to as terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism, for us, it's insanely minimal, next to nothing, considering that more Americans are killed by police than terrorists. What I'm saying is that I don't think it's a real threat, because compared to the other threats that are out there, it's very minimal. And it's really not that big of a deal. Terrorism kills far less people, insanely less people, than heart disease does. I'm just saying in comparison to the real threats that are out there, it's nothing. Secondly, what do you think of conspiracy theories like the Illuminati? The Illuminati, frankly, in my opinion, is just another word for ruling class. People like Alex Jones and whatnot get these ideas in their head that there's some group with secret society that's out to control the world through money. The global financial elite, the capitalist class, the very, very top of the bourgeois. Yeah, class perspective. As far as I'm concerned, Illuminati is just another word for capitalist class. Class, what do you think of the Naxalites, the communist rebels in India? I love them. Why did you become a Maoist third worldist? What events, if any, marked the transition from Maoist to Maoist third worldist? A lot of things in third worldist theory make a hell of a lot of sense and explain certain phenomenon that have been going on that traditional Marxist-Leninist Maoist ideology just isn't explaining. Why the tremendous pacifism in the first world? And then when we look at other things like what constitutes exploitation, people who are opposed to third worldism consider employment to be exploitation. That's literally not what exploitation is in the Marxist sense. It is not receiving the full value of your labor. And then when we look at this globally, the majority of first world workers are overpaid. If we consider who creates the commodities that go into Walmart, and then the people who work there, in terms of value creation, the people who work there in the store and the retail, really, they don't create any value. Sure, they're part of the process of getting the product to the customer, but they don't create any value in doing so. The worker in the third world does. And if you think that the worker in the first world is exploited as much as the person in the third world, well, you're really kidding themselves. Well, you're really kidding yourself. The first world worker is not exploited because they don't add any value to the commodity. Now, normally this would just be like a division of labor. Okay, if you had the factory and the retail worker in the same country, this would just be a division of labor. And it wouldn't really mean anything. It wouldn't be that big of a deal. But when that division between that retail worker and the productive worker is a global difference, it's a global division, that's entirely different. Because then you have one country, a mass of people in one country, benefiting off the exploitation of another country through the process of imperialism. It's not just through the process of production and distribution, it's through the process of imperialism. And those first world workers are really benefiting from that. That would be the difference, because that takes on an entirely new dynamic when it's done globally, as opposed to just domestically, which is what anti-third worldists don't get, because they just ignore that part. They just consider, oh, well, I'm exploited because I'm employed. Well, that's not that's not the Marxist definition of exploitation. So their point is moot. Why are you such a likable person? I don't think I am. Is the technological unemployment the final contradiction that will put an end to the system? If it's the final one, I don't know. But it would certainly do that. And by this person means the complete automation of labor, meaning where people literally just don't have to work anymore. Well, you would literally, if that happens, there will not be capitalism, because it literally would not be capitalism, because it wouldn't be able to function. It would be something entirely separate. So if this does happen, yes, that would be the death of capitalism. Will it be the cause of the death of capitalism? I don't know. There's a lot of things that could happen between now and then. What is your opinion on the claims that Soviet Union, Maoist China were socially conservative and homophobic, transphobic? Like, homophobic, that's like the whole world was homophobic at that time. In fact, I would actually give Yugoslavia the one good thing Yugoslavia ever did. The one good thing that Tito's leadership ever did was to decriminalize and try to accept homosexuality. That's the only good thing the country ever did. Now, as for the Soviet Union, that was a little bit different. Of course, there was much homophobia, and that's largely because they were coming out of such a religious, control. The church had so much hold, particularly over Eastern Europe. Of course, that would be different. That would be different now, but again, everybody was homophobic back then. So it's like you really can't expect any better. Mao, on the other hand, Mao's view, while it turned out to be completely incorrect, that homosexuality, transsexuality came as about of bourgeois consciousness. It came about as a result of alienation. Of course, we now know that that's wrong. But Mao's position was, just get rid of capitalism, and this will go with it. So it was not entirely hateful. It's like he didn't preach to hate gays and transsexuals. He just said, don't worry about it. It'll go away in time. But, of course, we found out that this is incorrect. And what do you think of the claims that Mao Zedong was a womanizer? If he was or he wasn't, who cares? Like, define womanizer. Do you mean like he got married a couple times? Is the accusation that he's a womanizer even true? But again, even then, it's like of what relevance, really? What is your thoughts on liberation theology? I don't like liberation theology. I don't like using religion for a revolution like that, because one day you're going to run into the problem where somebody is going to need to do something and they're not going to do it on religious grounds. And then you're going to find out that the religion still has a greater influence on them than revolutionary ideology does. I think it's a bad idea. I think it's very important to keep those two things separate. Also, are you a fan of hip-hop? Yes, no. I like the style of music, but a lot of people in hip-hop are awful. How big is your coffee mug hoard? You know what I'm talking about. Yes. When I was playing Fallout, when I was going through it to make the videos, a friend told me that there was a character called Muggy that asks you to bring him coffee mugs. So what I did was, as I was going through the game, I was collecting as many coffee cups as possible and hoarding them all until the time came when I needed them. So when I got to Muggy and he asked for the coffee cups, I had 1,007 coffee cups. And then I traded him that for the ton of stuff he gave me in return. So that's what that was referring to. Do you even lift? Well, I lift the cheeseburger to my mouth, so if that counts. Are you bipolar? You seem to have peaks and dips of emotions. No, I'm not bipolar. I don't have peaks and dips in emotions. What you're seeing is me trying to stay calm and not be angry, and then failing to do so. Because when you're in this kind of political ideology and you're angry at injustice that's going on, sometimes it can be hard to keep your temper. How do you make libertarians stop strawmanning? It seems as though that's all they can come up with. You can't. That's literally all they can do. Like, libertarians know nothing about Marxist theory whatsoever. I mean, when I say nothing, I mean literally nothing. It's to the point where something on the first page of Capital, they'd be able to find the answer to what they're saying. Like mud pie argument. I made something, but nobody wants it. Therefore, human labor isn't the source of all value. You're debunked, Karl Marx. Well, no, he meant it as for commodities. Commodities are defined as a product that's created specifically for exchange. If it's not exchanged, then the value isn't realized. Like, it's a complete straw man argument. I also have a different statement type of question you can respond to, or direct, blah, blah, blah. Because different jobs and occupations require different risks, skills, and amount of work done, wouldn't everyone having the same wage flip things on its head and make one work hard just as slaves? Okay, this is false. Marxists have never argued to have the same wages. This whole thing about a garbage man making the same as a doctor is complete BS. We have never argued that. We have never pushed for that. Ever. We have had wages on scales. The more difficult the job, the more it does pay. But you're talking about socialism, a transition towards communism. But this whole thing that we advocate everybody being paid the same is absolutely false. Because what we do believe in is each according to his ability, each according to his need. And we don't believe everybody has the same need. Nobody believes that. So this thing, we never say this. We don't believe it. It's not what we do. Labor vouchers in a communistic society, yay or nay? Nay, because communism would no longer be at that point. It's no longer about labor vouchers are like money in that they are an expression of value, because a labor voucher is created when a commodity is created. Thus, it's an expression of the exchange value of a commodity. Once we're in communism, exchange value ceases to exist, and there's only use value because we're producing it for its use and not for its exchange. So I would say in a period of socialism, maybe, but in the actual communism, no, it wouldn't be there, because what it represents, a piece of value, is no longer the purpose of the commodity being there. Why does Mao reject the nation of the negation? See, this is the thing that I thought was weird. He does say in one of his works that there's no such thing as the negation of the negation. But then he turns around and uses it. Unity, struggle, unity is negation of the negation. He goes around and he ends up using it in a whole bunch of different places. Theory, struggle, theory. Spurs says criticism, unity, criticism. That's negation of the negation. So I really don't get why he would say that and then turn around and use it all the time. I do know his work on contradiction. I believe it was on contradiction, where he said that he didn't believe in the negation of the negation. The original version of that work, before the one that was published, didn't have the part where he said there was no such thing as the negation of the negation. So I think it's actually questionable to say that he didn't believe in it, because there seems to be contradicting versions of that speech. One wasn't him and one was him. So it's very strange. If he did actually reject the negation of the negation, he would be wrong, and it would be really weird because he keeps using it all right and through his theory. How is criticism, unity, criticism superior? You criticize them, you rally around the new correct line, and then you criticize them if it comes along. I don't see like how anything would be better than that. Kurdish independence. Opinions? Yeah. Kurds should have their own independence and their own right to self-determination. And the question of how you would get that depends on what it takes to do it. Baathism. Opinions? It's completely meaningless. Baathism doesn't mean anything. It's like, okay, a strong state with some social programs. Okay, well, we're not trying to do that. And by the way, that's also not socialism either. Socialism is class conflict. When you have a dictatorship of the proletariat, it's one class actively suppressing another. That's not what Baathism is. So Baathism is completely meaningless. Opinions on the Arab world in general. Possibly one of the worst victims of U.S. imperialism. In my understanding, a true communist state would involve the work being evenly distributed. Again, false. We don't argue this. Each according to his ability is each according to his need. Then the goods being freely distributed based on need. I'm well aware of the communist blah, 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 blah. And of course, under this model, needing a good state bureaucracy to arrange this distribution. In an anarcho-communist state, European libertarianism, again, there would be a real loss of poverty, private ownership of land, but a lack of state structure would mean a need for an actual market. Rather about analysis. This is for rather about analysis. I wonder if you could juxtapose to distinguish the two separate communist ideologies, compare the pros and cons of each system. Okay, I understand what he's doing here. Either economic planning the distribution of those commodities, or using an actual market. But the lack of a state structure would mean a need for an actual market. False. If you're doing it based on market, what exactly are you doing? You're distributing things according to their exchangeability, their exchange value, which means you haven't reached communism at all. At all. Because the point of communism is to get rid of the production of things for exchange. It's just for need. But if you're now saying that you're using a market, you're very clearly not there. So it's actually kind of contradictory. We do have to know to some degree how much of something is needed, and that would require someone to perform that function. I mean, there's a big difference between someone who's taking a survey trying to figure out how much of something we need and somebody putting a gun to your head or using poverty to force you to work. But these are not the same thing. Of course not. But I mean, the market is a key element of capitalism. The law of value, the market, and competition. If you're preserving any of these things, you're not in communism. So I don't know where ANCOMs get the idea that that's where you want to go, because you still have a major piece, of capitalism if you have that. So you could possibly claim socialism in the transitional phase, but in the end of actual communism, you can't have these. You know, this one's interesting. You have sacrificed justice to mercy. One, define justice. Two, define mercy. I would say no. No such thing. In fact, I'm a big believer in the death penalty. So what do you mean that the sacrifice justice for mercy? You've sacrificed independence to unity. Again, false. It's claiming that individualism and collectivism are mutually exclusive things. You've sacrificed reason to faith. False. A way of analyzing the world and planning out how it should go is not faith. In fact, believing that just the market will do it magically by itself is faith. You sacrifice wealth to need. Yep. You've sacrificed self-esteem to self-denial. Yeah, because nothing screams to self-esteem like having to constantly tout how great you are and more than everybody else and how other people are lesser than you, and you're such a unique and great individual. Because that just screams self-esteem. You've sacrificed happiness to duty. Why? Implying mutually exclusive. This was a really dumb question. Do you pick socialism in one country over world revolution? Okay, this is Trotscum garbage. Basically, it's like Stalin believed in the tactic of socialism in one country. That is a way to build revolution worldwide. To say that he didn't believe in Trotsky's permanent revolution, therefore he rejects revolution across the world. This is absolutely false. This idea of Trotsky's idea of permanent revolution will not work to bring revolution across the world. That's why he rejected it. So therefore, if you reject Trotsky's plan to bring revolution across the world, therefore you reject having revolution across the world. It's completely false. Socialism in one country. Create a place from which you can have a stronghold to export revolution or to give support. The other idea was just stupid. Just have everybody suspended up in the air waiting for the right moment for everybody to strike at once. Or whatever it is that permanent revolution means to any individual Trotskyist, because it actually just keeps changing. That's one of the jokes. Ask a Trotskyist party what permanent revolution means, and in the morning you'll have 3 different parties. What do you think of the whole Zoe Quinn drama that resulted in liberal feminists fighting for the gaming community? I absolutely couldn't care. I don't care at all. What are your thoughts on anarcho-communism? Do you believe a vanguard party is necessary to achieve communism? Yes. How are you going to suppress the bourgeois if you have no mechanism by doing so? That doesn't make any sense to me. They're not just going to go through some spontaneous class consciousness transformation and begin to help you. No, you have to actively suppress the capitalist class the same way that they do to you. And you need a force by which to do that. You need a guidance and a force by which to transform society. It doesn't just spontaneously happen by itself. You literally do need that. So I would say, on what basis could you conclude not having a vanguard party works? Socialism in one country created socialism in many countries. Permanent revolution created socialism in no countries. Again, all victories of socialism over and over again have been done through the vanguard party. I'm not saying permanent revolution is the same thing as ANCOM. I'm not saying that. I'm saying what we know works, we should use. Why would we argue something that we know doesn't work? Like, that's literally the means by which to get the job done. So it's like arguing a tactic that doesn't work. Why do kids love the delicious taste of Cinnamon Toast Crunch? Probably because it's a load of sugar. What is the meaning of life? I don't think that there is a meaning of life, to be honest. I think life came about as the result of accident, of the development of the universe, evolution, and all that. The meaning of life is whatever you make it. You're asking me to objectively measure the meaning of life when there is no objective reason why it was created. So, what do you think of metal music? It's music, right? In a communist system, how do you get luxury products like better TVs, movies, gaming stuff, etc.? I know you need some food, housing, medical care, but who decides who gets additional stuff? What I've mentioned even more. I have some ideas, but I'd like to know if there's a single method or something. We've never come across this yet. Probably some kind of investigation into what Cuba does now would probably be a better thing, but it would not be a complete comparison because a lot of these consumer things probably wouldn't even exist because literally we wouldn't want them. I mean, you can't want video games if you literally don't know that they exist. It's one of those things where in the transformation from one society to another, we'll figure out the answer to that one. But as I say, we don't have it right now. There is one question left that people kept asking me is, what do I think of Tito? Tito is a scumbag. Tito is a piece of shit. He was a pathological liar. He made up that Stalin was trying to kill him. This has been debunked. Like even his propaganda minister admitted that he made it up. He was as reactionary as you could possibly get. And now this is what I mean by that. The 3 core elements of capitalism: competition, the law of value, markets. All of these things continued to exist in Tito's Yugoslavia. If you're doing the 3 core tenets, how do you claim that you're a socialist? You're literally doing the opposite. But then Tito was turn around and just claim, yeah, but my living standards. Well, we're not here. That's not the point of communism. Isn't just to raise your living standards to the highest point possible. It's about eliminating poverty, not trying to create exorbitant amounts of wealth. If that's all you care about, then by all means go to capitalism. If that's all you care about, then why do you even consider yourself to be a socialist? You're just a complete fraud at that point. There is no such thing as Titoism. As Titoism is not socialism. It's literally the opposite. It says, people come back with, oh, but it's worker cooperatives, implying that worker cooperatives cannot be bourgeois. Yes, they can. A worker cooperative in the first world would be as exploitative to the third world as a regular corporation. But there's literally no getting rid of it because you're still in a market mechanism. Titoism is like the most reactionary thing you could possibly believe in while trying to call yourself a socialist. It's absolutely ridiculous. It is the absolute most tanky position that you could possibly take, because it literally flies in the face of what socialist theory is. And that's the main questions that I wanted to answer. So thank you for sending in these questions. I hope I did enough to answer them, and keep on watching.